Hey everybody, thank you for joining me in another video. In this video I'm going to talk about a game between Liepin and Mikhail Tal that was played in Riga in 1950. In the game, Liepin had white pieces and Mikhail Tal had black pieces, and the game began with e4 and c5, the Sicilian defense, knight to f3, knight to c6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes on d4, and then knight to f6. And in this game, white played knight to c3. Of course, if knight takes on c6, then simply b takes on c6. And while this is still playable for both sides, black has these nice little open lines that maybe he can take advantage of in the future. But in the game, white played knight to c3, d6, opening this line for this light squared bishop to develop, and then also helping to support eventual e5 pawn push. Bishop to e2, preparing to castle kingside. Other moves that are playable in this position are bishop to e3, bishop to g5, and then bishop to c4. But in the game, after white played bishop to e2, black replied with immediate e5, striking in the center, pushing the knight back to b3, bishop to e7, preparing to castle, bishop to e3, bishop to e6, and we have kind of a symmetrical position here. White finds himself with two queenside knights, and black has a knight on each side, but a lot of symmetry going on here. Black also has the central pawn majority, which is common in Sicilian positions when black sacrifices, or rather exchanges, not sacrifices, his c pawn for white's central d pawn. So then white replied with knight to f3, and this is perhaps not the, it's certainly not a bad move, but it perhaps isn't the strongest move, because now white has spent two moves on his light squared bishop, and he really doesn't have very much space because the knights and the bishop are controlling any potential squares that the light squared bishop could go to. Black continued with castling kingside, and then white castled kingside as well. And black a5, threatening to start harassing these knights here. Knight to d5, and so we say an attack on the flank is best met with an attack on the center. And black continued with just a4. So, of course, you probably have already seen it, but what if knight takes on d5, then white, of course, forks the bishop and the knight, and this would just be a rookie mistake, probably a mistake that I would make in one of my games. But so after knight to d5, then a4, harassing the knight, bishop to b6, queen d7, knight to d2, moving to safety, taking the knight on d5, pawn takes bishop, knight to b4, c4. So white's trying to solidify his center here, or what remains of it rather. Black has, this bishop is not so active compared to white's bishops. This bishop maybe has a little bit more freedom now to move, but we'll see what black can do in this position. So knight to e8, looking to remaneuver black's pieces maybe. Queen to e2, connecting rooks, f5. And so with queens on the board and white still having the bishop pair, perhaps a move like f5 wouldn't be one's first consideration for a candidate move, because of course now black may have created some weaknesses on light squares around his king. But we'll see why this perhaps maybe isn't the best move, or isn't that dangerous of a move rather, because white doesn't really have any immediate way to exploit these light squares around black's king. g3, kind of a passive move. Of course, it gives white this escape square for his bishop. If e4 was pushed, but even surely Tal wouldn't be so inconsiderate as to push e4, because if e4, then white has a really good move here. So if you want to take a moment to pause and evaluate what you would do, or rather what the best move would be, go ahead, feel free to take that moment. And so if you found knight takes on e4, then you're correct. Of course, why black may wonder why would white sacrifice his knight like that. F takes on e4, and then there's another killer move for white, and that is bishop to g4. And suddenly we can see why the bishop pair can be so dangerous, because now where's black queen going? So that's a possible continuation if black wanted to be stubborn and push e4. It's important to be flexible, to be able to change plans as needed. So in the game, instead of e4, black played rook to a6, bishop to e3, and this bishop, as we'll see, gets really boxed in. f4, bishop to g4, attacking the queen, queen d8, g takes on f4, e takes on f4, and then knight to e4. And so this is an interesting position in the game here, because if we go one move back, we have this bishop that's under attack, and so maybe white responds with a3, taking the bishop. F takes on e3. If white immediately takes the knight, then black is up a piece. But F takes on e3, knight to c6, d takes on c6, b takes on c6. And so we see here, relatively, it's materially, for minor pieces, it's even. White's pawn structure is a little bit less organized, because he has this isolated pawn over here, these two, this flank pawn and one central pawn, and then these two pawns in front of his king. Of course, white's pawns around his king are no longer there, and of course, whenever you're castled, the idea is to be safe and to make your king safer, and so obviously removing the pawns is not something that supports that idea. Another way that the game could have continued instead of a3 is, maybe white wants to move his bishop to safety. So with bishop to d4, knight to c2, and we have this fork here. And so white may think that he's walked into a trap, but really this isn't actually that bad for white. Queen to d3. There's not really any way to successfully defend both the bishop and the rook and prevent the taking of either piece. So black plays the obvious. Rook takes a1, bishop to f5, and right here we see that white's pieces are aimed at this h7 pawn. And so black has to be very careful here, because there's really, the move that may come to mind, which is g6, isn't the best move. We'll see what happens here if g6. What was white playing? White has a really good move here. And if you want to take a moment, feel free to pause here, but I'll just keep going. Bishop takes on g6, and then bishop to f6. What happens if h takes on g6? If h takes on g6, then queen takes on g6, check, blocking, and then checkmate. So getting greedy and grabbing the bishop wouldn't be a good idea. So bishop to f6 would continue the game. When your opponent's on the attack, it's a good idea to see if you can try and exchange his attacking pieces for some of your pieces and see if you can weather the storm. So bishop to f6, not exchanging but capturing on h7, and then king to h8. And so we see this king is cut off from his army. His pieces are on really passive squares in the 8th rank. The rook on the a file really isn't doing anything anymore, and this bishop seems like it's about to come under a lot of pressure. So after king to h8, queen to h3, lining up this really deadly potential for discovered checks, rook to f7, bishop to g6 check, king g8, taking the rook, capturing the bishop, queen h5 check, king f8, queen h6 check, king f7, and then knight to e4. And like I said, this bishop here is coming under a lot of pressure. Additionally, and perhaps more importantly, Black's king is fighting this battle pretty much on his own. You know, he has, again, this awkwardly placed knight in the corner, the passively placed pieces on the 8th rank, and this awkwardly placed rook on a6. So going back, we've kind of gone off on a rabbit trail here. Going back after, we'll just go back a few moves here. After bishop to g4, queen d8, g takes f4, e takes f4, knight to e4, f takes on e3. Yeah, that's the obvious move. a3, attacking the knight, and notice here this knight is trapped. There's not really any safe space for it to go. Knight to f6, and then bishop to e6 check. And so, you know, White thinks here that he's putting his bishop on an outpost in the middle of Black's camp. He's exploiting this light square weakness around Black's king that Black created whenever he pushed f6. And so, you know, at first glance, this position doesn't look too bad for White. Of course, king h8 is played. Going back, though, this may be a better continuation for White. Knight takes on f6, bishop takes on f6, a takes on b4, e takes on f2 check, and then queen takes on f2. And so, you know, maybe we can see some sort of fight for this f-file here. White may now consider planting his bishop here on e6. Might consider sometime in the future moving over and taking control of this e-file. But certainly this position would be playable for both sides. So in the game, after bishop e6 check, king h8, knight to g5, and so White thinks that he has this tricky move here where he can fork and be up in exchange, you know, trading his knight for the rook. Queen e8, stopping that idea. A takes on b4, and then queen takes on g6. And inadvertently, White has walked into this deadly pin that we will see becomes a decisive factor in the rest of the game. Queen takes on e3, defending the knight. h6, h4, this knight is lost. H takes on g5, h takes on g5, and then knight to h5. Where are the pieces around White's king? They've all gone. This lone pawn is being very brave, perhaps not the smartest, but brave nonetheless on g5. And you know, it turns out maybe this nice, what we thought was a nice bishop on e6 isn't actually so nice after all, because it's not really doing much. So knight to h5, f4. A natural move trying to defend the g5 pawn and keep this pawn structure somewhat intact in front of the king. So take a moment and try and find the best move for Black. Feel free to pause. In the game, Black played knight takes on f4, and then White played rook to f2. You may think at first glance that Black is going to just give up his knight. So you may want to immediately capture. But then, if the rook takes, then we have this position. But it turns out black actually has an even better move. And queen takes on g5, and he's forking the king and this rook here. After king to h2, knight takes f4, and then this is just very uncomfortable for white. His king is isolated on this h-file. All of his pieces are over here, not really accomplishing much, and actually, black has a mating attack going for him. If we go back, a move real quick, if instead of, this is the best. Excuse me. Yeah. So in the game, rook to f2, bishop to g5, and we have this really, really uncomfortable situation. This knight may have ideas of going to h3, discovered attack on the queen. This queen is lined up on the same file as white's king. This rook is ready to take over this open f-file, and this is just not a position anybody wants to play. King to h1, taking the bishop. That didn't accomplish anything. Check. King g8, moving to safety. Queen takes on e6, check. Queen takes on h6. Queens are exchanged. Rook to e8, defending the pawn. Bishop to f4, pushing c5. D takes c5. B takes c5. Rook takes on e6, and then rooks are exchanged. White is in this endgame. He's down a bishop, and he's also down a pawn. Rook takes on a4, evening the pawns at least, moving the bishop to safety and attacking the c-pawn. Check, moving the king to safety. Rook to c8, rook to c6, looking to exchange. Rook to b8, bishop takes on c5, and this game is pretty much over after bishop takes on c5, because then rook takes on b7, offering to exchange rooks again, and then bishop to d4, and then in this position actually white resigned rather than continue. So I think that the most instructive part of this game is to consider where you're moving your knights, because we saw here that this pin really became the deciding factor in this game. This pin, and not only that, but whenever white pushed g3. g3 weakened the pawn structure around white's king, and there really was no need to do that, one might argue. So I hope that you found this video instructive, and until the next one, I wish you good luck with your chess, and bye for now.